So a GUI or a graphical user interface is the interface that allows users to interact with devices such as computers, tablets, and smartphones. Some of the main elements of them include buttons, checkboxes, and toggles. And for web applications, these are typically made and styled using HTML and CSS. However, when working in WebVR, specifically when using Aframe, we kind of can't really use HTML and CSS, but instead need to do things a bit differently. In this video, I'll be showing you how I built a UI for my Spotify VR player. If you're wondering what this is, it's a web app I made that lets you connect your Spotify account and play music in WebVR. I made this using Spotify's SDK and API, as well as A-Frame, and if you'd like to check out the full in-depth tutorial for how I built this project, consider supporting me on Patreon, where I'll be uploading exclusive content and projects, and where you can find this project. So for this project, I was inspired by the Spotify Glassplex. I don't know if you've seen them before, but I saw and wanted to try to recreate one in VR. Um, I started with the simple metaverse built with React and Aframe, and if you haven't already, check out my other videos where I show you how to build one of these metaverses. But the first thing I added after creating the metaverse was a wooden block model to be the base of our plaque. Then using Figma, I created a few PNG files, one for the glass plaque itself, and a few others for our basic music player buttons. Now, I will say, before I even began building the UI, I had already set up my backend to use Spotify services. Though I won't be going through this in this video, I'll be adding a link to the Spotify documentation that I used to build the backend. But as I also mentioned before, you can also find the in-depth step-by-step tutorial of how I built this in my Patreon. But I'll quickly just go over some of the stuff that I had to start with. Um, the file that I'm using for the base of the project, the base of the UI is world.js. In here we have an object called a track that's going to grab data from Spotify and create this track object with a name, album, images, and artist information. And then our main function is called world. And inside of here, we're using a loader to load that block model that we have through these steps right here. And I go over this more in detail in some of my other videos of how to build the metaverse. Then we create a few constants using the useState hook, is paused, is active, player, and current track. Then inside of useEffect, we add, this is how we use the Spotify SDK. Then upon our Spotify SDK being ready, we create a player. It's called Spotify VR. And to do this, we need to pass in an auth token, which is part of the setup that we have to do for the backend. We set our player to one of the constants, to the constant we created up here, and then we have a few listeners to know when the player is ready, um, to know if it's been disconnected or goes offline, and then if the player's state is changed. Um, when this happens, we do a couple things like set the track or set paused. And then here we connect our player through this connect function. And then right here, this section, we are grabbing some button components that we'll add later on, but we're looking for them and we're going ahead and adding some click events. And then going in here, we have our basic A-frame scene. Now, typically, web applications are built using HTML, and though this might look like HTML, this is actually A-frame components and A-frame tags that we're going to use. Whenever you're building an A-frame app, you need to have an A-scene tag, and then everything inside of that A-scene tag will render stuff into your VR world. We have some assets that will be our ground texture and sky texture, and these are just coming from a link to a CDN to a couple of images. Next, we have our sky, which references that sky texture image here. We set some properties, the rotation, height, width, radius, and so forth for that. We have a plane that serves as our ground texture. We also set some properties here. And then this entity tag is what we add our model to, and we set our position, rotation, and scale of that model. Then if you look down here, we have a camera and a cursor. And the cursor pretty much lets you click on stuff if you're like using a web browser. we're going to start off by adding our assets inside of the a assets tag. These are the assets that I showed in the beginning. We have our glass frame, we have our play, pause, next, and previous buttons, and we also have Spotify logos that we'll add to give it more branding. On top of this not being HTML code, we can't actually add HTML code into A-frame. We can't add div tags or paragraph tags or any header tags. So we're just pretty much going to have to use tags and components that A-frame provides. The main or the basic component that you can build anything out of is an entity, and that's what we're going to start off by adding. We're going to add an a entity tag that's going to serve as our base for our UI. I'm going to give it an ID of UI, and then I'm going to set the position to these coordinates. Now I already went ahead and played around with this, and that's where I got these numbers for the position, but you can play around and mess and change however you want to position your UI. Next, inside of our entity, we'll add a second entity tag, and inside of that, we're going to add an image with the source being our Spotify logo. We'll set the scale for this, and we'll save this and quickly take a look at what we've done so far. So I'll save this and open up the web browser so you can see what this looks like. And so far we can just see the Spotify logo there. And we'll probably move this, but next thing I want to do is I'm going to create something called a mixin. And what a mixin does, it's a way to reuse commonly used properties for a component. You can define them inside of assets, and you'll just add an a mixin element. And then inside of here, we're going to add all the properties. So we'll give it an ID of frame. Our geometry, we'll set it to a primitive, and it's going to be a plane with the width set to 2.3 and the height set to 3. Next, our material, we're going to give it a source, and this is going to be our glass frame that we added, the PNG file. We'll set transparent to true, and then we will come back down here, and then we'll add another entity tag. This tag will give it an ID of music frame. The position, we'll set it to 0.128 and 0.05. Now, so we can use that mixin, you say mixin equals to, and you give it the name of the mixin that you created. So now, as you can see, we have our glass frame up here. The position doesn't seem to be correct, so I'll just change this, and then yeah, that looks better. But we still have to move our Spotify logo up. So I'll go ahead and set that position for that. And now if we go back, it looks much better. So yeah, it's coming out pretty nice, as you can see. So now let's start adding some buttons. We'll add another entity tag, and we'll give it an ID for our play button. Material will be the play button asset, and the position will give it 0, negative 0.85, and 0.52. Now we'll come back up and we'll create another mixin. This time it'll be uh, called button. We'll give it again a geometry of primitive, plane, and then our width and height, we'll set it to 0.5, and then we'll just set our material to transparent, and we can go ahead and add this mixin into our button entity, and we'll have a look at what it looks like. Okay, and so now we'll just repeat the step for the rest of the buttons for the next and previous button.
we'll just create entities. I'm just going to copy and paste it and then change the ID, material, and the positions. And if we take a look, it looks good, but I'd want these next and previous buttons to be a bit smaller. So I'm going to create another mixin and just call it track change. And then here I'll set the width and height to be a bit smaller. I'll just set it to 0.3. And then if I replace the button mixin with the track change one for both of these buttons, there, it looks much better to me at least. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a function called connected, and what we're going to use this for is to display our image for the song that's playing or display a message that says connect device. We're going to add an if statement, and using our current tracks we're going to check to see if there's an album and then if there's images, and then we'll grab the first image from our image array, and from that check to see if that has a URL. If that's true, we're going to return an A image. And the source for this image is pretty much just going to be that image from the current track, the same check that we had up there in our if statement. If this isn't true, we're going to just return an entity that has a scale of 4 by 4 by 1, the position be 0, dot 2, and 0, and then the text value is going to say connect device, and we'll set align to center. It's basically going to be a text that will be displayed if there is no current track. And then where we would add this is inside of our music frame entity. We'll add it in here. And then this function should just run and return either an image or an entity with the text connect device. And we can go ahead and check this out. So yeah, you should see connect device because we don't have any current track. So now coming back, something else that we're gonna go ahead and add is another mixin. This time we're gonna add one called poster. We'll just go ahead and copy this one here and then just paste it, and we'll just change the name to poster. So this one, we're gonna change the width and height to the 1.55. For our material, we're gonna set the color to white and make our shader flat. And then we'll just set the position to be inside of the glass frame. And then we can go ahead and add this mixin to our image inside of the connected function. So now let's actually connect the device and we'll see the project start to come together. I created a playlist on my phone to play a few songs, and I'll pull up my phone. Here you can see I got a song that's playing. If I click connect to Spotify VR, I should get notified that I'm connected, and now I should be able to hear the song play. Here I'm just skipping to the next song on the playlist. No me importa lo que de. About Z hit the club. Yeah, yeah. So we're able to see that the functionality is working. We're able to play songs, skip through them, play and pause them. Now let's work on our buttons. So as you notice, when we click on the play button, it just stays on play. We're gonna add the functionality so that it'll switch between pause and play. To do this, we're gonna add another use effect hook, and inside of here, we're gonna create a constant play that grabs our play button by using a query selector and grabbing that play button ID. Once we've done this, we can set our attribute, which is going to be our material, and we'll set the source of our material. It's going to be the play and pause image that we added to our assets. We're going to check is paused. So whenever is paused is true, we'll display the play button image, and whenever is paused is false, we'll display the pause button image. So it's just your typical play pause button functionality. So now let's have a look, make sure this is working. Yep, seems like it's working.
So I did remove the audio just so you could see, not have to listen to music every time I click play or pause. But the next thing that we're going to focus on is our hover effect. So whenever we hover over the buttons, we're not sure if we're actually over them or if we're clicking on them. And I mean, it's hard to tell once you're hovering over a button. So what we're going to do is add an effect that makes the buttons grow in size, get a little bigger once we hover over them. And we'll add this for all three of the buttons that we have. And we'll actually just add this to our mixins. The first one is our button mixin, and we'll add an animation scale. And then inside of here, we'll say property scale to 1.3 by 1.3 by 1.3, duration 200, and then start event mouse enter. So upon the mouse entering, it'll increase its size. Then we'll add an animation scale reverse, and we'll copy the same stuff um, from the animation scale and add that into our animation scale reverse. The only things we'll change is the scale to. We'll just set everything to 1, and once the mouse leaves, that's when the reverse will happen. So if we come here and test it out, we can see that it's working. Once we enter, it grows, and once we leave, it goes back to its normal size. Now we can go ahead and copy this same animation for our other buttons. So we'll just copy both this animation for scale and scale reverse and add it into our track change mixin for our other buttons. And if we go back, we can see that now all the buttons function the same way when you hover over them. They just grow, and then once you stop hovering over them, they go back to their normal size. And this just makes like a better user experience, so that you know that you're actually hovering over the button, and once you click on it, it should perform its functionality. But that will pretty much wrap it up for this video. I did host this project on this link, spotify-vr.player.onrender.com, if you'd like to check it out and connect with your Spotify account. Thank you very much for all the support, and until next time.